Please join me in prayer. Holy Spirit, help us to place ourselves in your hands so that we may be shaped into who we are called to be and into doing what we are called to do. Amen. Both of our lectionary readings this morning have a number of things about them, obviously, but the thing that stood out for me in each of them that I'm going to focus on is the idea of giving thanks, of experiencing and expressing gratitude. This also fits really well with an idea that church growth has for a practice to commend to the congregation that I'll talk about at the end of the sermon. I'm mostly going to focus on the text of 1 Corinthians. And so, as I often like to do, I want to talk about a little bit of the context for this letter and for many of Paul's letters. We don't know for sure the circumstances in which he wrote his letters. He doesn't usually say, I am writing from this location or this place. But it's a strong theory that he wrote a lot of his letters from prison. Because we know that he spent time in prison more than once. And to me, it makes sense. It doesn't seem like Paul's preference was to do ministry through letters. Like, if you think about it, we only have 7 of his letters. We can surmise there were maybe 8 or 9. There might be 1 or 2 that are lost. So in a whole lifetime of ministry, he wrote 7 letters. That isn't very many. And so it stands to reason that his preference was to do ministry face to face. You know, he traveled all over the ancient world. He was in Turkey and Macedonia and Greece because he wanted to found churches in person. He wanted to live and work in the cities where these churches were gathering together. And so I see Paul's letters as not his preference, but kind of like when he doesn't have a better option, when he's stuck. And it makes sense that he would feel stuck if he was in prison. And if he was unable to go in person to address issues, he would write a letter. His letters are extremely long for the time period. If you think about it, if you've ever written a letter, have you written a letter that's as long as like the letter to the Romans? Like that's like a 20, 30-page letter. Even 1 Corinthians is longer than any letter I've ever written. The average letter at the time was 80 or 90 words. Very longer famous letters that we have from people like Cicero or Seneca were like 200 or 300 words. Paul's letters averaged like 2,500 words, some much longer. And so I kind of get this image of Paul like pacing back and forth in a cramped prison cell, just kind of like ranting, frustrated. You know, he's used to speaking in front of people for hours. He's used to standing in the agora and preaching for hours. So he's not pithy. And he has his friend who's also mentioned in the intro to this letter, Sosthenes. Now, okay, I want everyone to say a word with me. Amanuensis. Ready? Amanuensis. You now got about $10 of seminary for free, so congratulations. An amanuensis in the ancient world was someone who would take dictation. So it's someone who was literate, who was good at listening, maybe had like a shorthand they would use. And because people weren't accustomed to writing in the ancient world, it was very rare. It was a verbal, oral culture. So people thought out loud. And so Paul would be thinking out loud, essentially preaching sermons sometimes in his letters. You can see the kind of speaker he was. And then an amanuensis, at this point, it's Sosthenes, it's another person in other letters, would be following him around, taking dictation, and then would kind of construct the letter out of what he had taken. Probably check with Paul to make sure this is it, and then send it along. And of course, there's no mail service, so sending a letter itself was incredibly difficult. Paul has a lot of reasons to be worried. as he writes to the Corinthians. A lot of reasons I think he would prefer to go there in person, and he does later. There's a visit between 1st and 2nd Corinthians. He's heard from Apollos that there's trouble. He's received a letter from Corinth. They've been in such distress that they have written to Paul to get his input on the issues they're facing. It's possible he also heard from Peter, and he'd also heard from Chloe's family. Chloe was clearly an influential woman in the church in Corinth, may have been one of the hosts of their gatherings, and she had also personally written to Peter, or to Paul, saying, we're in trouble. We need your help. So have you ever woken up or gotten into work and opened your email and there's an email chain with 15 emails already on it, and you think to yourself, oh no, what happened? This is kind of like the ancient world version of that. You get a bunch of messages from Corinth that there's trouble, and you think, it must be serious for this many people to write this many letters. And so here he is pacing back and forth, maybe ranting a little bit now and then, dictating, preaching, extemporizing. But he begins this letter, as he does many of his letters, by giving thanks. The place where he begins, and it's not going to be a glowing letter of approval. There are issues that need to be dealt with in Paul's view. But he begins by giving thanks. This theme, as I said, is present in both of our readings. In the psalm, the psalmist is expressing gratitude to God and saying, in essence, I haven't held back in my praise and thanksgiving to you, God. So in exchange, please don't hold back when I'm in trouble and when I need help. And that's kind of the feeling that it ends on, that our little segment ends on for me. In 1 Corinthians, Paul is opening with thanksgiving, and what he's doing is he's modeling giving thanks in two different ways, because there are a couple things going on at the same time that I want to tease apart and talk about, because they apply directly to our lives today, I think. The first thing that Paul is doing is he's giving thanks in a difficult situation. Remember that he's probably in prison. And with hindsight, we know that he doesn't die in prison this time, but he wouldn't have known that. And in the ancient world, you didn't get a prison sentence. You wouldn't be sentenced to prison for 20 years in the ancient world. You were in prison because you were awaiting trial. And when you were tried, you would either be let go or killed or put in slavery or disfigured. Those were the punishments that you would receive. So you might be branded or scarred, you might be forced into slavery, or you would be killed. Maybe exiled if you had a lot of influence, which is kind of like a social death. But a prison sentence wasn't on the menu. It's expensive to hold people in jail, and they're not going to pay for you. So he's waiting to find out if he's going to be exiled or killed or disfigured or put in slavery. In the midst of this, he's trying to write this letter. Paul is someone accustomed to hardship. From other stories in Paul's life, we know he's been shipwrecked. He's been violently driven out of a city and nearly killed multiple times. Every time he travels to a church, people come along after to try to undo what he's doing. So there's kind of a competition between different people planting early Christian churches. Paul was creating communities where Gentiles were welcome, but other people would come along and say, that's not right. You cannot be a Gentile and follow Jesus. So he's dealing with all these things. He's accustomed to hardship. And in a hard situation, in a way, it makes the least sense to be thankful. It's very counterintuitive when your circumstances are bad to give thanks. It makes sense if things are going well in your life, if you're happy, if something good happens. And then we know that if you give thanks and if you feel gratitude and express gratitude for that good thing, it increases your joy in that thing. It can make a good thing better to show gratitude. But it's counterintuitive, at least at first, to show gratitude when things are bad, when things are difficult. But it is potentially a powerful thing to do so. And this isn't in the sense of like, when life punches you in the face, you think, oh, thank you, give me another. Like, this isn't like a martyr kind of thing where you're like, oh yeah, throw the punishment on. That isn't the kind of thanksgiving. It's more kind of an act of survival. It's a way to be more resilient in a bad situation and to survive it and get through it. When we're in a bad situation, especially when it's out of our control, like it isn't we made a mistake and we're suffering consequences for that mistake. That also happens. When we're in a bad situation and it's out of our control, we can't change it through our effort. The only thing we do have control over is how we try to react to the situation. That's the one thing that we do have some say over. None of us has perfect self-control, but we have some. And this isn't a sense of saying thank you for the pain, but it's saying thank you for the good things that exist amidst the pain. So I don't know if you've ever had this experience where something bad happens, and it's a discrete bad thing. It's one bad thing. But it colors your experience of everything else. So one bad thing happens, and it makes you miserable for days. And you don't notice, it seems like there's nothing good that's happening in your life because this bad thing has happened. This happens because what we experience, what we see is filtered. Like 95% of all the things we see and hear, we never experience. Our brain filters those things out. It's actually one of the challenges of someone on the autism spectrum is their filter doesn't work as well. And so where we can filter out a weird, annoying noise, maybe they can't. Or we can filter out a bad smell that distracts us, but they can't. That's why sometimes you see people who are on the spectrum, like with headphones, when they're out in public, because the headphones are noise canceling, and they're filtering in a way that our brains do for us automatically. So think about it this way. If you think of yourself as short, you're going to see a lot more tall people than there actually are, right? Or if you hate a particular smell, you're more likely to smell it, ironically. My favorite story about this, and I tell it a lot, so I think it's okay. She'll yell at me later if it isn't. So when Pam was pregnant, she had two enemies. One was onions, and the other was burnt popcorn. So this one time, we were at the zoo, and we were outside the primate house. If you've ever been in a primate house in a zoo, it has a scent, okay? It's a strong scent. And we're outside the primate house, and we're going to go in, and the door opens, and Pam stops in the doorway and says, I can't go in, there's burnt popcorn in there. And all I smell is this wave of primate, right? Just primate, just like, because it's enclosed, and it's, So I was like, okay, hold on. I need to check. I need to find this popcorn in there. So I go into the primate house, and I walk around for like 5 minutes. And I finally find, in a part of the primate house, a dropped bag of burnt popcorn that she had smelled through a wall of primate rolling out of this place. I didn't smell it at all. I probably could have laid on the floor next to it. I wouldn't have smelled the popcorn. But she smelled it because she hated it, right? Or if you love dogs, you're going to see all the dogs. We have a mug at home that says, sorry I'm late, I saw a dog. Right? It's just that because you're like, yeah, that happens. If you don't love dogs, you won't even notice them. But if you love dogs, you see all the dogs. As we're driving around, we just point out dogs to each other. Or if you're thinking about having a baby, or if you want to have a baby, or if you're afraid to have a baby, you're going to notice all the babies. You're just going to see them everywhere. You're just baby, baby, baby. Because your filter, it's on your mind, so your filter is giving you these things when it normally wouldn't. So this happens when we give thanks. In the midst of a bad situation, if we can give thanks for the few good things that are still there, we're going to see those things more often. We're going to remind our filter, hey, let that stuff in too. And it won't necessarily rescue us from the bad situation. Like I said, if it's not under our control, it's just not under our control. But we can control our response. And if our response is to give gratitude, even for little, minor things, like on a very bad day, you might be like, well, I had lunch, so I'm thankful for that. I wasn't hungry. That's not nothing. But building this capacity can change the way you experience your life, whether things are going badly or things are going well. The second thing that Paul is doing is that he is giving thanks for difficult people. And if you're wondering if he's having difficulty with the people in Corinth, read on in the letter. It's clear things are going on. But Paul is giving thanks for difficult people. He's not giving thanks for their bad behavior. That's not a good idea, and that's not what I'm talking about. But he's giving thanks for the difficult people. Part of the reason that this is powerful, I think, is that a large part of our reaction to other people has nothing to do with them, it's about us. In a similar way, a large part of other people's reaction to us might have nothing to do with us, or little to do with us. It has a lot to do with them. The biggest example of this that I can give is road rage. Someone cuts you off in traffic. You don't know anything about that person, but you are furious with them, right? And that has nothing to do with them. That has to do with you, because you're scared, you're angry, you're having a bad day, whatever, and you have this powerful reaction, not really based on what they did, because you're fine. They just did something aggravating. And maybe you've had that experience where someone just really doesn't like you, and you're not sure why, and it's hard not to take it personally. But you think to yourself, that person doesn't know me well enough to hate me. In the same way, you might have had a strong reaction to someone in the past. You might have a strong reaction to someone now. When you think about it, like, wow, what's really behind that? Like, what did they do? Was it that big a deal? So when we give thanks for difficult people, part of what we're giving thanks for is they're kind of a teacher. When we have a problem with someone, it's often an opportunity to learn more about ourselves, to look at our strong reaction and think like, why am I having this strong reaction? What is going on? And of course, they're a teacher we don't want. We didn't ask to be taught, right? It's not comfortable, but there's a lot of situations where when we're dealing with a difficult person, they might really be behaving badly. And we may have to address that. That's a separate sermon. But a lot of our reaction to them, I think, is about us. And so when we're dealing with a difficult person, we have a chance to learn about ourselves. I had a connected realization just this morning. Imagine if all of Paul's communities functioned perfectly. Imagine if everyone got along, there were no troublesome people in any of his communities. We would have no idea what Paul thought. We would not have a single word that he wrote. We would not have a single word that he said. The reason that we have this whole section of the Bible that shapes our theology even now is because Paul was hitting his head up against difficult people. And as a result, he had to work through his own thoughts and his ideas and his theology and write them out and send them. We would never have this if there were no difficult people in Paul's life. And I thought that was something worth thinking about in our own lives. My advice is often to not wait until you feel forgiving to forgive. And don't wait until you feel warmth and affection before you show love to someone. And I wouldn't wait until you feel thankful to express gratitude and thanksgiving. The reason for this is that obviously feelings can prompt behaviors. If I feel warmth towards you, I will behave in a loving manner, probably. But it also goes the other way as well. If I demonstrate love for you, I will begin to feel more warmth. If I forgive you, I will begin to feel more forgiving. And if I express thanksgiving and gratitude, I will begin to feel more thankfulness and gratitude. You may not believe me, so you're going to have an opportunity to test it. In Sunday school, when the kids gather, one of the things they do is like a gratitude, thankfulness practice that they do together. And we have a similar practice in the Hagler household. At the end of the day, we talk about what do we give thanks for from this day. And sometimes it's just lunch, or I made it through school, or my boss wasn't in today, or whatever. Right? You take what you can get, but we wait until there's something, even on a really bad day. And this gave us the idea in church growth to commend a practice for the congregation, starting Ash Wednesday, going through Lent, and then continuing through the rest of the year. We are going to be encouraging you guys, the congregation, in gratitude and thankfulness practices. That's why we've been asking for journals and notebooks. If you have any unused journals or notebooks, continue giving them, because we'd like a chance for everyone to have them. But we're going to encourage you to reflect at some point during your day, as a household, if you have a household, as an individual, if you're an individual, but reflect on your day and what you have to give thanks for. This could take 30 seconds, honestly. It could be very quick. It could be a nice thing to do with kids if you have kids and they're doing this in Sunday school. You can do this with them. We're going to be providing some prompts and some thoughts about ways to approach this question of what do we give thanks for, what are we thankful for. And we're going to go through this practice through Lent and then continue through the year and see what happens. Test it out. Do this practice for a while and see if you feel more thankful. And let me know. I'm curious. I think you will. I could be wrong. Regardless, I encourage you to look for times when you can give thanks. In particular, times where you can give thanks in the midst of a hard situation. Just take a moment. It could be 99%, oh, what am I going to do? 1%, I guess I'm thankful for this, and then keep going. Just a little bit. And also to give thanks for difficult people, even if it feels weird. You don't have to tell anybody you're doing it. You can just do it privately. Thank you for this person. Okay. And see what effect it has. Not only are we being faithful, because Paul does this not randomly. He does this because he thinks Christ has called him to give thanks. He says it in other letters, and so he does. So not only are we living more faithfully as we do this, but we also might just change our life for the better. Amen.